I was 18 when this occurred to me in late November of 2024. I was merely shopping for my family's early Christmas presents in Buffalo's Walden Galleria Mall. I prefer to finish my Christmas shopping early because of the atmosphere and decorations. I also enjoy visiting the mall around Christmas. For me, there's something more fun about shopping when there's a sense of Christmas. I already had around 3 bags with me. I made stops at Sephora, Zara, and Victoria's Secret. I got my mom's and sister's stuff from Sephora, and I got my dad and brother something from Zara. I also bought a lot of goods for myself. After spending hours around the mall, I just wanted to sit and take a break. I took a seat on one of the seats beside the towering tree that the shopping center erects each year. Although there were still some people in the mall, the number was decreasing with every minute as it was about to close. A man approached and took a seat beside me. At first, he made a joke and made me laugh. He appeared to be an innocent older man, perhaps 62 years old. Ironically, he made me think of a slender Santa Claus. We spent a few minutes conversing. The key things he stated that really stood out to me were that he has been visiting this mall ever since it opened and that he was afraid it would close. He gave me a photo of his kid on his phone after remarking that I resembled her. To be completely honest, I didn't perceive any similarities. The female actually didn't look anything like him or me at all. Additionally, it featured a picture of a female who appeared to be 8. To be honest, he had the appearance of someone who could have been her grandfather. When I finally decided it was time to go, I stood up a little uncomfortably, said my goodbyes, and turned to leave. I didn't turn around to check if he was observing me. I'd prefer to stay away from awkward situations at all costs. I started driving home after getting into my car. The mall is only 10 minutes away from where I live. My family owns multiple homes, and I frequently live here by myself with my brother. This was among those periods of time. I think this was a Thursday night. My brother frequently goes out on Thursday evenings while attending the University of Buffalo. This evening was no different. 2 other large houses and ours are in a cul-de-sac, and I circled back to our house after turning directly into cul-de-sac. It's not like the cul-de-sac. There isn't a single open court. It more closely resembles a roundabout because of the circular piece of grass with a few trees in the center. At this point, I received a message on my phone just before I pulled into the driveway. "AirTag found moving with you," it read. In my panic, I drove back down the street in case I was being followed. Rather than pulling into the driveway, I needed to confirm that the AirTag was on or in my vehicle. I managed to get the AirTag to emit a sound, and while I was half expecting it to originate from the car's exterior, I was surprised to hear a beep coming from one of my shopping bags. I felt like puking up when I reached into the bag and took out an AirTag. After shifting back into drive, I proceeded down the street and through the air, tagging out the window. I then made a U-turn and headed back to the house. In an attempt to conceal the automobile, I pulled into the driveway and hurried inside, opening the garage to see my mother's vehicle there. Leaving the automobile outdoors was my only option. I secured the front door and shut the garage door. As a precaution, I called my brother Cody and informed him of the situation. He advised calling him if someone dropped by the residence. I was frightened by his statement alone, especially when I could tell by the tone of his voice that he wasn't joking. But he also sounded rather inebriated. I tried to just distract myself by going to the living room. However, if that were the end of it, I wouldn't have written this. I felt nauseous at the ringing of the doorbell. I was dreading it in the back of my mind, and it actually happened. The doorbell was followed by 3 loud, different knocks. I tiptoed gently to the door and halted as a man's voice on the other side whispered, "Hi, Ashley, I think you might have my AirTag." A little muffled. And it all came to me at once. That dude from the mall was the one. He most likely threw his AirTag into my Sephora bag on purpose in order to follow me home. Through the textured glass, he could see me. I heard him exclaim that he swears he dropped the AirTag in there by mistake when he must have noticed me running away. I paid no attention to what he had to say. Even if he was telling the truth, he would have noticed that the AirTag wasn't in my house, which would have meant that all he wanted was to see me enter the house. Cody said he was on his way home when I contacted him again, even though he initially believed I was kidding. I would only need to wait 10 minutes or so because the bars in the downtown area are close by. I glanced back at the door and saw that the man was no longer visible through the glass. I reasoned that he might have left. To break the silence, I went to the living room and switched on the television. I made an effort to keep the man at the door out of my mind. I was waiting for Cody when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I glanced over, but nothing was there now. I tried to tell myself it was nothing while I sat there. The dude might have gone. I was momentarily persuaded of that by something. But after watching TV for a minute or two, I heard the same voice outside the window remark, "I love it when they play dumb." He was standing directly outside the window with his face against the glass when I looked. When he saw me noticing him, he grinned. That elderly man from the mall was the one. "Don't pretend you don't know I'm watching you," he added after raising his hand and tapping on the window. I shouted into Cody's phone that the man was at the window when I called him. He instructed me to dial 911 and stated he was almost home. I hung up and followed through on that. I was nearing my breaking point when the man simply stood there grinning at me as if it were a game. I therefore moved from the living room to the windowless office. I heard Cody come into the driveway a short while later. Cody dashed inside, but the man had vanished by the time we turned to face the window. When the policeman arrived, he looked but couldn't see any footprints. Although the officer was not quite knowledgeable about how to report an AirTag, he offered me a police report number to use and advised getting in touch with Apple to begin the onerous tracking process. I attempted it the following day, but it turned out to be a far more complex legal procedure than I had anticipated. I simply lost interest after a few weeks of hearing and seeing nothing more. Perhaps the dude bailed and never returned after noticing my brother and the police arrived. However, I must admit that after giving this some thought and seeing the girl's photos on his phone, I sincerely hope that it wasn't another girl he might have abducted or worse. I sincerely hope that was just a picture of a random female that he removed from social media or anything. I was drastically altered by this encounter. I fear that I will never be the same person I was before this happened. Claire is my name. Although it wasn't that long ago that I forgot about it, it also wasn't like it happened last week. I feel safe discussing this tale now because I no longer reside in the area where it was set. I had recently relocated to a new place in order to advance in my career. It was your typical mid-sized city. Nothing particularly noteworthy. When the first odd event occurred, it was a Tuesday evening. My phone buzzed while I was listening to a podcast on my way home from work, which is, mind you, a quick 15-minute journey. I have never seen that notification before. An AirTag was discovered traveling with you. Initially, I believed it to be an error. Perhaps one of my pals was pulling a practical joke, or perhaps someone had left their keys in the parking lot. However, I was appalled as soon as I opened the message. The AirTag had been traveling with me for more than an hour, according to the app. That implied it had been in my car the whole way to work. Or worse, it had been in the parking lot before I got in. I looked in the glove box, under the seats, in the back seat, and even in the trunk. But nothing was there. No AirTag. And aside from that, nothing was strange or out of place. I understood what was happening right away. My automobile had an AirTag in it, and the person who put it knew where I went. Worse, they were aware of my location. It was difficult for me to maintain my composure. I was forced to drive home after failing to locate the AirTag, which meant I would be directing a possible stalker straight to my flat, but I couldn't do anything else. After arriving home, I gave my automobile another, more comprehensive inspection. However, even though my phone insisted it was there, I was still unable to locate it. My rational side wanted to call the police, but I held back. What were they able to do? They had no gadget to show them, and even if they did, there was no concrete proof of its placement. I gave myself some comforting information to help me relax. It wouldn't be the end of the world if someone found out where I lived, because my apartment had good security, and I couldn't really drive home. I attempted to ignore the AirTag since whoever owned it already knew where I was, and neither the cops nor anybody else could change it. I drove to work, as usual, the following morning. When I arrived at work, the message appeared once more, but I chose to ignore it. Primero worked hard, but I didn't accomplish anything that day. I kept thinking about the foolish AirTag. Decided to find the thing as soon as I got home that night. Even though I had examined the majority of my car's hiding places the day before, I spent about an hour searching through them all. Just as I was about to give it one more try, my fingertips struck something substantial as I ran them down the crack where the back seat joins the back. I was already aware of that. I tried to ignore how fiercely my hands were shaking as I carried the object inside. I was at a loss for what to do, so I just removed the battery from it. It might have served as evidence, so I didn't want to destroy it, but I also didn't like the idea of it remaining operational. I had never felt so vulnerable as I did when I considered that someone had been observing everything I did for days or perhaps weeks. I couldn't stop wondering about who could have planted that monster in the first place. As I tried to fall asleep that night, I had a good number of guys in my life, including flings, friends of friends, and ex-boyfriends, but none of them would have committed such a serious transgression. I had a somewhat terrible day at work and arrived home late the following evening. I froze when I tried to unlock my apartment door, something I had done 100 times. The entrance to my apartment was already ajar. I live by myself. Nobody should have been inside, not even my parents or any of my friends. I stayed outside. It would have been a really bad choice. Rather, I immediately returned to my vehicle and dialed 911. They did a comprehensive inspection of the apartment. There was no concrete proof that anyone had ever been there. There were no forced entry signs, fingerprints, or other signs that someone had been inside. In the end, I informed them of everything that had occurred over the previous few days and showed them the AirTag notifications. I didn't know anyone who would engage in such behavior, yet the cops kept asking if I had ever been stalked before. Everything about it was a nightmare. After that, things did slow down a little. Even though my stalker had most likely heard about the police visit, I still moved out. Fortunately, I don't believe somebody traced or followed me to my new location. However, the fact that someone in my life broke into my apartment and pursued me still bothers me. However, the most terrifying aspect of this whole situation is that I still do know how they broke into my flat in the first place. There was no damage or breakage to the door. A key was all that was needed to unlock it. A key that should have been kept private. This occurred a few years ago, and for reasons you'll soon comprehend, I want to relay this story as anonymously as possible. The only detail I feel comfortable sharing is that I'm from an upper middle class suburb. I'm going to tell you about a nightmare that lasted for several months and resulted in numerous legal problems that occasionally made me seriously wonder whether my life would end. That is to say, it was not only frightening, intense, but also genuinely overwhelming on a level that is hard to describe. That's not a joke or a figure of speech, in my opinion. On some days, I would stare at the ceiling for hours on end, while thinking about some really sinister topics. All of this began a few weeks after I ended things with my first committed girlfriend following college. We'll simply name her Devon. I will not get into it. I wouldn't subject myself to that. Let's just say, though, that things did not end well. I wasn't very upset about ending things, though. I was almost relieved to let go of the fact that she was psychotic. Zenon is a friend of mine. His parents have always been extremely affluent, quirky, and totally out of touch with reality. No, strange name. I still do fully get why he hosts parties at this enormous property he inherited from them so frequently. It's not like they died or anything, but that is his world, not mine. I'll just name her Taylor. I ran across one of my ex's pals at one of these gatherings. It was not the most unexpected thing in the world to see her there. The majority of people in our community are familiar with Zenon, and almost everyone attended the same local universities and high schools. Furthermore, the majority of those who left for college returned in the end. The aggressiveness and obviousness with which she was approaching me were unexpected. Throughout our relationship, Taylor would often bring me up to Devon. I therefore thought her behavior was really odd. However, after a few more beers, I finally gave in because my skepticism was short, and before you accuse me of being foolish, you wouldn't hold it against me if you knew Taylor's appearance. In the end, we hooked up in one of the bedrooms above. She was almost out of the room before I had even begun getting dressed, so I must have been much more bewildered than she was. I discovered my wallet was missing from my jeans pocket as I was exiting the room. I looked for Taylor even though she had vanished at that moment, most likely to go flirt with another man in the crowd. I searched for maybe 20 minutes before giving up. I hurried back upstairs to the room we had been in and looked all over, but I couldn't find my wallet. My first impulse was to give her a call, but it took me 10 seconds to realize that I was still blocked from the time Devon and I split up. Couldn't pay me to unblock Devon because I couldn't possibly do it. There was no method for me to contact Taylor. However, I wasn't overly upset about losing my wallet. Most likely, it was just the alcohol. However, I choose to put the issue out of my mind for the remainder of the evening, take pleasure in the celebration, and genuinely savor the fact that I had gotten ahead of my ex by hooking up with her pal. After that, I don't recall much. I'm very certain that one of my friends gave me a ride home. I immediately thought of the AirTag I had in my wallet for circumstances, just like the one from the previous evening. As soon as I woke up the following morning, my iPhone was turned on when I pulled it up. Since it was Saturday, I was off from work. Decided to find my wallet, despite my terrible hangover. Since the location was at a nearby gym, I thought I would drive over there and confront Taylor about taking it, or find out if she had taken it accidentally or if someone else had actually found it. The AirTag went offline as soon as I got out of my car and started to move toward the gym entrance, which I thought was odd and almost impossible timing. I was more irritated than I should have been when the front desk receptionist would unallow me to explore the area without a membership. Instead, like some lunatic, I wandered around the building's perimeter, peering through the glass to see whether Taylor was inside. However, I couldn't find her anywhere. Actually, I didn't see a single person I knew. Not Devin, not one of my pals, not a stranger at Xenon's party. Nobody. I was forced to go home and put my frustrations and whatever work I wanted to do before Monday aside because the AirTag was still down. At that point, I'd already canceled all of my cards, so I couldn't fathom what someone could do with an empty wallet. For the remainder of the day, I continued to regularly check its whereabouts, but it never returned to the internet. It wasn't until midday on the following day that I noticed it was online once more, this time at an unidentified local park. Determined to find out what was happening, I hurried to my car once more and went out to its site. However, the same thing took place. The AirTag stopped working as soon as I got out of my car. It seemed as though someone was intentionally playing a practical joke on me. In the park, there were a few individuals, but once more, I didn't recognize anyone. This time, I was a little more frantic, so I actually began jogging around the park, but to no avail. I started to feel nauseous as I was making my way back to my car, as if someone was watching me. Even worse, as if I were being watched. How was it possible for someone to disable an AirTag as soon as I arrived? I guess they were observing me. I couldn't do anything about it, even though it was a truly unsettling concept. In retrospect, that was the first time I thought there might have been a malevolent situation at play. I conducted some research once I got home and discovered that the person who had my wallet was most likely taking the AirTag battery out and putting it back in order to turn it on and off. The idea that someone, most likely Taylor, was playing with me in this way was extremely upsetting. I couldn't really focus on the scenario because I had work the following day. However, the AirTag remained offline for the following few days. In order to avoid giving Taylor the joy of seeing me stray like a lost puppy, I decided to give up on the entire situation. Naturally, though, things went south again as soon as I started living my life. Only the subsequent events were almost 1,000 times worse. I was trying to sleep in bed when I was startled awake by the sound of glass breaking. I could only characterize it as suffocating because it had been years since I had ever experienced pure horror. For around 15 seconds, I was physically unable to breathe. I had the sensation that I was being choked. When I eventually came out of my daze, I contacted 911 and explained the situation. After that, I secured the door to my bedroom and heard the person beneath me begin to rip through the space. I desired to go down there and face him head on. Yes, I did. I promise. However, I was without a weapon. Furthermore, I had no intention of dying over any personal property, so I waited. However, it appears that the intruder left before the cops showed up. They were, too. I handed the cops a list of everything that was missing, along with my statement, my display, my laptop, a few other items, and several other pieces of equipment. It's reasonable that you might wonder why I didn't relate the break-in to the AirTag incident, and I considered doing so, but I decided that would have been overly dramatic and concerning. After a few weeks, I continued to periodically check the location of the AirTag out of curiosity, but each time I did, it was offline. That is, until it wasn't one day. It was appearing in a fairly well-known bar that I had visited a few times. I couldn't help myself, even though I had vowed never to fall for someone else's game again. I probably shouldn't have surprised you with what transpired when I arrived. The AirTag went dead as soon as I was within striking distance of the pub, this time trying to blend in by wearing a sweatshirt. However, I was unable to control my anger and frustration this time. In fact, I began approaching strangers in the line and accusing them of stealing my wallet. It wasn't good. I was just randomly approaching folks, and I couldn't stop, even though I knew I was making a scene. My scream was made worse by the fact that everyone was staring at me. It became so severe that I had to be physically ejected from the premises by one of the bouncers. It was among the most humiliating and upsetting experiences of my life. After that, I was only played once more. This time, in the middle of the day, at an unidentified coffee shop. I made a vow to never again check the AirTag's location. For real this time. However, a little more than a week later, my life was all but over. Excessive detail becomes extremely dangerous at this point. Please be assured, however, that everything I just stated is entirely accurate. What followed left me in a very bad position and irreparably damaged my mental health. One day, I was getting ready for work when someone knocked on my door. It was the police, and they had a search warrant for my home and an arrest warrant for me based on suspicion of stalking. They were specifically searching for a journal that was purportedly concealed in a drawer on my dresser. I didn't know what was happening. They weren't asking for my permission, but I informed them that my room didn't include a journal. That was the purpose of the warrant. They discovered a journal, despite my insistence that there be none in my room. I didn't witness their discovery of it. By that time, I was already handcuffed in the back of a police vehicle. The months that followed were a complete nightmare for me. Evidently, Devon had been working on a case against me for more than a month, without my knowing. She had presented what appeared to be copious amounts of proof that I had been following her around for the whole of that time, even though I had actually never seen or spoken to her. She claimed to have taken photos of me in the gym, that particular park, and other places where the AirTag had enticed me. She was there the entire time, even though I was positive she hadn't been at any of the places where those pictures were taken. She had text messages purporting to show she was there. However, things worsen. It appears that over the course of several weeks, she received a number of text messages from my phone. Messages that were extremely upsetting and harassing, basically what a real stalker would. Say were what I was at the time. Devon would beg me, quote unquote, to stop messaging her, claiming that my activities were harming her mental health. She takes medication for her bipolar disorder. She also claimed that she was living in continual worry and anxiety as a result of what I was doing. Among other things I don't want to mention, she even stated that she crashed her automobile due to the stress of my harassment. Nobody took my story seriously. She had all the evidence, and I had none. The most incriminating piece of evidence was the journal. It allegedly included page after page of me listing Devon's daily routine and engaging in these insane discussions with myself about all the horrible, disgusting things I planned to do to her. I felt nauseous when I read it, not only because it was so upsetting, but also because I didn't write any of it. No lawyer was able to assist me. I was unable to demonstrate that any of her evidence was false, and it was too strong. I was told to enter a guilty plea at one point. I am guilty of numerous crimes that I did not commit, and would never consider committing. It was completely repulsive. I felt like a repulsive person as a result of that. It was something entirely beyond my control that ultimately saved my life. I wouldn't even bother naming the man Devon was having an affair with, but he phoned the police and admitted to being involved in the whole thing. He informed them that during Zen's party, Devon had given him my AirTag, which he had obtained from Taylor. He claimed that Devon had given him instructions to entice me to various spots, switch off the batteries when he saw me, and take discreet photos of me from a distance. He initially accepted it because he felt it was a humorous joke, but once she started discussing setting up evidence in my home, he began to have second thoughts, according to text conversations between him and Devon. Additionally, the messages demonstrated just how she had accomplished that. While we were still dating, she reportedly manufactured a duplicate of my house keys without my knowledge. After that, things proceeded rather swiftly. Devon ultimately admitted to everything, even breaking into my house herself, after feeling pressured to reveal the truth. Since she knew my password, she had taken my laptop. She intended to use it to send herself those unpleasant messages, which was something else I was unaware of. She reasoned that since my laptop had been taken, it couldn't be used as proof against her tale, and that I had emailed them from my phone before deleting them. She claimed that it was safer to break in and make it appear like a random robbery than to repeatedly enter my home covertly over a period of weeks to send and remove communications. Justice was done, and everything was eventually dismissed, but I doubt I'll ever get over what transpired. I could write pages and pages more on this story, but I bet it's already very lengthy. I haven't even described the details of what happened next, how my friends and family turned against me, or the agonizing process of removing my name from the internet. I have unshared my theories regarding my ex's behavior throughout our dating days or why she would visit such links in the first place. I'm not sure whether I'll ever feel at ease dating again. The worst thing about it is that I will always be terrified by the thought that someone could use the judicial system and technology to effectively ruin my life and virtually get away with it. That man might have truly destroyed my life if he hadn't grown up with a conscience.